Well, hello everyone. We are continuing our study on relationship masks. And last week, if you remember, we had a Facebook Live session and we talked about the avoider. And that one went very well. Today I'm not doing it live because I have a dental issue and I'm on some medication right now that will help. And I'm afraid if I did it live, I might get in some pain and do something embarrassing. So I'm not going to do that right now, but I would ask you to keep me in your prayers. I'm going to have a root canal done as soon as dentists are back in the office and people are not homebound. Deflectors. Boy, how I'd like to deflect some tooth pain, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just taking my antibiotics and taking some anti-inflammatories, and it is helping a little bit. But I wonder if you consider yourself a deflector. And maybe you think, well, I don't know. Tell me a little bit about it. Well, let me give you an example. And the example, I'm going to call him Samuel. And by the way, in these case studies, we're changing the names. These are not people's real names. I wouldn't do that. And so you don't have to worry about that if you ever come in for counseling. But I want to tell you about Samuel. Samuel is just a great guy. Even when he's depressed, and he struggles with depression, but even when he's depressed, he still has a perpetual smile on his face. Whenever he came to appointments, he was cracking jokes. He was making everybody in the office laugh. And we would sit down and we would talk. And he would say, I need a woman in my life. And I would tell him, but you've been married and divorced. You've had lots of relationships since then. He says, I know, but they never seem to last. Well, I knew this wasn't about being unlucky at love. It wasn't just that the cards were stacked against him. So I asked him about his growing up years. And Samuel's parents had divorced when he was 5. His mother died when he was 9 years old. It took me weeks to get this out of him. He had been skipping around it. He had been jumping around from one issue to another, anything except talking about this. And when I began to probe about his mother, well, Samuel said he had a tremendous fear of the thought of going there. He didn't want to talk about her at all. Well, as time goes on, God began to heal Samuel, but soon it became evident that there was another obstacle to Samuel's enjoying intimate relationships. This wasn't the only thing getting in the way. It's not that Samuel wasn't funny or witty. He was both. In fact, it was his humor that made him so likable. It was just a God-given part of his temperament, his personality. But Samuel also used it to avoid dealing with the more painful issues of life. For example, when his 10-year-old daughter was going through a difficult experience, he would just make light of it and make her laugh, get her to laugh to get over it and get beyond these tough times. And I told him that might work for a little while, but eventually she's going to need a dad who can empathize. And I pointed out to him that he was already training her to be a deflector as well, passing it down from generation to generation. When we began talking about the whole issue of Samuel's relationship mask, I got the typical response. Yeah, I know, but this is just the way I've always been. God made me this way. Okay, I'm not disputing that, I would say, but what if this is also the way that you avoid pain? Pain that you need to be dealing with so you can get beyond it. Well, he said, can you blame me? I mean, pain hurts. This doesn't hurt. Well, no, I can't blame you at all for trying, but Scripture's very clear about us dealing with our pain, about us mourning when we need to mourn. And he said, you mean about my mom? Well, yeah, I mean about that, but also about 100 other wounds you've been describing to me. I said, Samuel, take a look at this verse. And I handed him my Bible and I said, tell me what this means. I had my Bible open to Ecclesiastes 7, and I said, read verses 3 and 4. Sorrow is better than laughter, he read. Sorrow is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. I bet you didn't even know that was in the Bible. Let me read it again. Sorrow is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. So I asked him, well, what do you think that means? He says, I don't have a clue. Well, maybe it means that laughter can be a cover, and the person who uses it for that purpose really isn't very wise. Well, yeah, I guess that makes sense, he said. And I took my Bible back and we turned over to Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 13, and we read this. Even in laughter, the heart may ache, and joy may end in grief. Let me read it again. Proverbs 14:13. Even in laughter, the heart may ache, and joy may end in grief. He said, this is absolutely unreal. I didn't know those passages were in the Bible. And I said, well, maybe God's trying to tell you something. What do you suppose it is? Well, we went on. It's not necessary for you to know the rest of that story, but God was trying to speak to him, and maybe he's trying to speak to you. If you are a deflector, does any of Samuel's story ring true for you? Samuel began asking God to make him honest about his joy and about his pain. He's no longer trying to avoid pain in his life. He's trying to deal with it and get past it. Deflectors secretly know there is pain, both in their past and maybe even in their future. But they refuse to be honest about it. They live a life of lies, lying to themselves about pain. It's subconscious. Sometimes not just subconscious, sometimes it's actually conscious, but it's a way of thinking that becomes the deflector's approach to life. And it's not good. It becomes a mask that gets in the way of your relationships. And the underlying pain is always going to come to the surface sooner or later. And when it does, the deflector will use things like sex or substances or work or something to self-medicate. Something that will typically take the edge off. And that enables them to get back to their easygoing demeanor. And that's where rebellion comes in for deflectors. They fear that if they get in touch with their pain, if they get in touch with their soul, nobody will like them. If they're really them, if they show everybody who they really are, they think nobody will like them. And so they're fun, easygoing, laughing, smiling people all the time, even in the midst of pain. And the deflector's children, oh, they've got the coolest parent in the world, they'll say, until they really need you. And then they hold it against you. When they need more than just a belly laugh, they resent you. The deflector, and last week we talked about the avoider. These two have a whole lot in common. They both avoid their true feelings. They both avoid conflict. They both skirt around reality. But there are some differences. The deflector has personality to spare. I mean, everybody just loves the deflector. But the avoider, not so much. An avoider is more laid back, easygoing, quiet. Sometimes even a bit separate and isolated. The avoider's more reserved. The deflector, a go-getter. If the relationship mask of each were translated into hand-to-hand combat, the avoider would absorb all the blows. Just keep on punching. He would either absorb all the blows or run, one of the two. That's the avoider. But the deflector would deftly block each blow like a kung fu master. He's a master at it. Just deflect everything thrown at him. And each blow will be directed away from or turned back at the person hitting. Well, deflectors come in all shapes and sizes. They're not just predominantly men or women, young or old. They come in all shapes and sizes. But let me give you another word that maybe you've heard that you don't associate with a deflector, but that's what a deflector is. Sometimes they're called codependent. You ever heard that term? Sometimes deflection is known as codependency. They really are one and the same. Whether I cover my sins with a fetching personality or by focusing on my neighbors and everyone else, whatever I do, it's still a diversion. I'm deflecting reality. I'm deflecting my pain, trying to get rid of it. But I'm not really getting rid of it. Well, is there anything that is good about a deflector? Is there any positives we can bring out? I mean, maybe you're listening and you say, okay, I relate to that. I think I am something of a deflector. Well, we've established that the sin of the deflector is dishonesty, really. It's just not being honest with yourself, and you're not being honest with others, and you're not being honest with God. They consistently tell lies about themselves by being cheerful when they're not cheerful, and up all the time. Of course, that breaks down occasionally, and deflectors then become aggressors. Oh, we're going to talk about aggressors in the future, so don't worry. We're not going to leave you out. But the deflector, when you can't hold that perky, positive, easygoing, laughing, smiling persona all the time, when that drops, you become the aggressor. But for the most part, they deflect attention away from their own reality. So what skills do deflectors have that they can use against their own sin? How can they be a betterment to others? Well, what if, instead of trying to make everybody feel happy all the time, what if the deflector made everybody feel loved? I don't mean deceptively loved, because that's what you do, deflector. But I mean honestly, biblically speaking, really loved. What if you're not you're wonderful, you can do no wrong kind of thing. No, that's a deceptive love. What if you honestly loved? What if you could honestly look in people's eyes and show them real love? People need to know about their sins. Real love isn't always syrupy. Deflectors who will catch this vision and grab a hold of what I'm trying to get across to you now, they won't pretend that others aren't sinful. Like Jesus with the woman at the well, they'll be able to say, the man that you're now with is not your husband. But they won't launch into a sermon on adultery. There's a very fine art here. It requires finesse. It isn't sloppy agape. It's clear-eyed. It's a deliberate attack on someone else's shame. You're trying to get rid of their shame. You're utilizing the only effective weapon that there is. You know, Peter didn't say, above all, shame each other deeply. That's not what he said, which is what many of us do in the name of holiness. No, deflectors will learn how to stop drawing attention away from their own reality and away from other people's reality. They'll learn to stop using others' faults as a distraction from their own. That's when they become the aggressor and they turn reality onto you. They'll deflect attention away from the lesser reality while pointing to a greater reality. What I'm saying might be misunderstood by some as softening sin. No, I don't want to soften sin. I don't want the deflector to soften sin. Hear me very well. Sin is deadly business. We can't take it lightly. The cross is proof of how serious it is to our God. There's surely a time to call a person's actions what they are without mincing words. But many of us in our righteous zeal walk up to the bruised reeds in our midst and give them a final snap. That's using Isaiah's terminology in Isaiah 42 and verse 3. Or we take what little spark there is left in their wick and we snuff it out in the name of exhortation. Well, as I said, doing this requires a good bit of skill. But deflectors, you have the skill. You've been doing this your whole life, turning one thing into something else. For any of this to happen, though, deflector, you have to embrace the negative and painful feelings in your own life, realities that's in your own soul, in your own heart. Let me give you some tips. If you're a deflector, as strange as it may sound, you being nice all the time just may be your downfall. It may be your sin, because it's really dishonesty. So I'm going to encourage you to meet with a preacher or a counselor and see what you're deflecting from. Find out. Take that hard journey, that painful journey, but oh, it's well worth it. Find out what you're deflecting from. Another tip, Jesus is not ashamed nor afraid of those things that you're hiding. Those things that you hide when you deflect. He's not afraid. He's not ashamed. Let him into those areas. Let him heal you in those areas. Find someone who's straightforward to be accountable to. Someone who you can talk to, pray with. Resist the urge to say or do something every time a situation becomes tense. Because when you say or do something, you're probably just going to deflect. Let the tense situation be tense and deal with it. Lastly, remember, Jesus hides your sins, so you don't have to. Those are some tips that you as a deflector can work on. Maybe you can deal with some things. I hope so. Next time, we're going to talk about the personality, the relationship mask that is also known as a worshiper of the darkness. Wonder what that can be. Just a little teaser for next week. Which one is a worshiper of darkness? Well, we'll talk about it next week. I'll see you then.